Now, because video game bosses are supposed to be tougher than regular enemies, gamers get a great sense of accomplishment from killing them. Not only does this foe's defeat allow the player to progress to formerly inaccessible areas, but it also proves that you fine-tuned your skills and are worthy to face more prominent challenges. Now, if a game has 10 or say 20 bosses, you could expect a couple of them to be filler, and you know what? That is totally fine. But sometimes you play a title where every enemy encounter feels mesmerizing and creative, and so you'd assume that the same care would go into designing the final boss. But sometimes we can end up being disappointed by these closing encounters because they feel like they fall far short of everything else that we've experienced up until that point. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games with amazing bosses, all except the last one. Number 10, OSMUND Saddler, Resident Evil 4. Now, every boss in Resident Evil 4 feels like it was crafted to top the last one. Battling El Gigante is truly awe-inspiring. Mendez's unsettling design, well, that makes this confrontation genuinely creepy. And although you encounter Salazar at the halfway point, he's more epic than most final bosses. And as for Krauser, well, he's quite possibly the most satisfying boss to fight in the entire franchise. So after taking part in so many entertaining battles, you start to wonder how the face-off with arch-villain OSMUND Saddler is going to top them. Well, sadly, it doesn't even come close. After the cult leader mutates into a monstrous spider, you'd expect him to pull out all the stops, but if you hit Saddler with anything combustible like a mine, grenade, or an explosive round, he'll start to shrivel up, allowing you to walk right up to him and strike his weak spot. And once you perform this action a couple of times, you can finish him off with a rocket launcher. The fight is so easy that you can actually beat Saddler without getting hit, and if you're fast enough, you can even defeat him before you even know what his attack pattern is. Number 9, Bowser, Super Mario Sunshine. Now, Super Mario Sunshine might have been a bit of a disappointment to those expecting another leap forward like Super Mario 64 was, but at least the boss encounters were delightfully imaginative. Plus, it introduced the gaming community to the wonder that is P.T. Piranha. However, it appears that Nintendo did not have a clue when it came to this platformer's climax. After making your way through a surprisingly bare-bones dungeon, Mario comes face-to-face with his nemesis, who's relaxing in an acid bath. Upset that the Italian plumber has interrupted his vacation, Bowser begins spewing fire and tossing acid at you. By launching yourself into the air and ground-pounding the 5 corners of the room, you'll shatter the tub, forcing the King of the Koopas to fall into the chasm below. Because this whole ordeal is over in about 45 seconds, most players assume that it's merely the preamble to the real fight. After all, Bowser fought Mario in a multi-phase brawl in other games, so why would it be any different here? But that isn't the case. Once Bowser falls out of the bath, it's game over. And you know what's worse than that? The battle with Mecha Bowser in Peanut Park is far more innovative. If this robotic version of Bowser served as the final boss instead of the real one, well, the showdown wouldn't have felt quite as anticlimactic. Number 8, Dark Beast Ganon, Zelda Breath of the Wild. Whoa, I know that a lot of you are going to jump down my throat and say that this is perfect, this is the perfect Zelda game, but let's just face facts. When it came to the Dark Beast version of Ganon, well, it was left wanting. You see, in the Legend of Zelda saga, Link must save the land of Hyrule from the embodiment of evil known as Ganon. Because evil cannot truly be destroyed, Ganon therefore cannot truly be killed. Every time he's seemingly vanquished, he returns in the following generation where he faces off against the next incarnation of Link, trapping the two in an eternal cycle. But in Breath of the Wild, the latest version of Link's nemesis, Calamity Ganon, has grown weary after failing to eliminate Hyrule's champion. In a last act of desperation, Ganon decides to do something that he's never done before. He relinquishes his immortality to embrace all of his dark power, believing that that will finally be enough to defeat the hero of time. Basically, this incarnation, Dark Beast Ganon, is supposed to be the most powerful version of the character that we've ever seen. But it doesn't really amount to anything at all, since this battle is really easy. Due to Ganon's sluggish movements and very telegraphed attacks, it's like he wants you to put him out of his misery. In fact, the clash with Ganon beforehand was dramatically harder, which is where your archenemy was supposed to be weaker. It doesn't make any sense. Dark Beast Ganon is meant to be the be-all and end-all, and yet, well, he's just the easiest boss in the game by far. Number 7, the Time Devourer, Chrono Cross. Because Chrono Trigger has amongst the best final bosses in gaming, many hope that the sequel Chrono Cross would conclude with a fight just as momentous. And considering many bosses throughout this underrated follow-up are pretty awe-inspiring, it looked like the last battle with the Time Devourer would indeed live up to expectations. But unfortunately, it was anything but. The brawl itself isn't spectacular, but I guess it isn't a dud by any means. But the real disappointment sinks in immediately after the Time Devourer is destroyed. After he's defeated, you'd expect a heavily detailed epilogue explaining what happened to each party member, as is common practice with Square Enix titles. Instead, the credits roll and that's it. There's no ending. That you're done. So what the hell happened? Well, it turns out you can't watch the true ending unless you defeat the Time Devourer in a specific way. Basically, you need to equip a certain weapon and hit the enemy with precise coloured attacks in an exact order. If you make one mistake or the Devourer breaks the chain, you have to start all over again. This method is so unnecessary and convoluted, almost no player could figure it out by themselves. As a result, it's deeply unfair why the developers made this attack method against the Time Devourer a requirement for unlocking the real ending. Number 6. The Destroyer. Borderlands. Now, Borderlands goes beyond the Call of Duty to ensure that every single person you meet feels like a three-dimensional character. Thanks to a snappy script and astoundingly talented voice actors, nearly everyone you meet feels vibrant, quirky, and memorable, no matter how minor their role in the overall story is. So, if you were assuming that the antagonist would be a deeply complex and riveting character, well, you'd set yourself up for disappointment. Instead, the last enemy is a generic boss with an aptly generic name, the Destroyer. Instead of giving the Destroyer a distinct design, the developers instead opted to make it look like just like a weird thing. Worse still, this creature isn't enjoyable to fight, it's not able to move, and the way that it flails its tentacles around is so pathetic that it feels like this Lovecraftian ripoff is attacking the player out of sheer boredom. And speaking of boredom, the Destroyer's health bar is so staggeringly huge, it takes forever to beat this monstrosity. But since you can blast at this behemoth while hiding behind these strategically placed boulders, you don't have to exert one iota of effort in order to destroy the Destroyer. Number 5. GWYN, Lord of Cinder, Dark Souls. Now again, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you will have a go at me for saying that this is a bit of a bad boss battle, but please try and hear me out here. Because you see, the bosses in Dark Souls vary tremendously in appearance and combat style, but they all share one commonality, and that is their brutal difficulty. If you're sick and tired of dying over and over again at the first or second boss, well, you just wait until you contend with the heavy hitters later in the game. And because the difficulty curve starts at 11 and keeps ramping itself up, you'd imagine that the last baddie, GWYN, Lord of Cinder, would jump out of the screen and stick his sword right in you, and that's why it's so hard to believe that he's an absolute pushover. GWYN is meant to have the power of a deity, and yet you can defeat him with parries, a technique that you likely perfected early on in your playthrough. Hell, even the Black Knights outside of his room make more of an effort against you than he does. But GWYN isn't just easy, he's anticlimactic. When you enter his room, there's no cutscene to build him up. He doesn't say anything. He gives no sense that he's a living person driven to end your life. I mean, he's nowhere near as bad as the Bed of Chaos, but still, GWYN is definitely more disappointing overall. Number 4. The Icon of Sin, Doom 2. Now, after storming through oceans of blood and facing off against brain spiders and rocket-launching demons, you can't even begin to imagine what abominable horror you'll be forced to combat at the conclusion of Doom 2. A skyscraper-sized demon, an army of hell, the devil himself? Well, no, instead you must face a face. Now, to this game's credit, the Icon of Sin looks pretty cool, but the problem is he's just a big head on the wall, meaning that he's completely stationary. Considering that you had to weave around pillars and zoom around arenas while blasting at the denizens of hell throughout your playthrough, it's a bit paradoxical for the final battle to be against an immobile enemy. And if you're expecting the Icon of Sin to have a massive health bar, well, guess again. All you have to do is shoot his weak spot 3 times with a rocket launcher to send him to, well, hell again. That's it, 3 hits. Some of the regular enemies in the game take more damage than that. Even though Doom 2 was literally a hell of a ride, this beloved sequel concludes with a pitiful whimper. Number 3. The Black Hand, Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. Because Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor was obviously made to take advantage of the fandom for the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, everybody expected it to be a simple cash grab. But by consulting J.R.R. Tolkien's expert Peter Jackson and working with the likes of Monolith Productions, the game that came out of it was a brilliant action-adventure with phenomenal combat, incredible characterization, and world-building richer than the Mines of Moria. Not only was Shadow of Mordor not the disaster that we were all expecting, it was one of the best video game adaptations of Tolkien's work. And Some would even regard this title as being perfect right up until it balls everything up at the finish line. After smashing through Sauron's fearless captains and the Great White Fang, you find the Dark Lord's most powerful general, the Black Hand, waiting for a fight. And since Sauron is amongst the most famous villains in all of literature, fighting the Black Hand is the closest thing you get to battling the ruler of Mordor himself. But if you thought it was anticlimactic when the Dark Lord died in the film after losing a finger, what Shadow of Mordor does is somehow even worse. Similar to the boss battles in Batman Arkham Asylum, most of the fight revolves around pummeling the Black Hand's lackeys rather than facing the Dark Lord's emissary one-on-one. And when the Black Hand enters the fray, he's vanquished after a 30-second QuickTime event. Considering that this guy was meant to be the top dog, it is baffling how insultingly simple he was to defeat. Number 2. Emperor Ing. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. As incredible as Metroid Prime was, some of the bosses were a little lacking. Instead of relying on strategy, certain enemies could just be eliminated by wailing on them with lasers and missiles willy-nilly. Fortunately, Retro Studios made sure that each boss in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was imaginative, tactical, challenging, and, most importantly, fun. Certain bosses, such as the Spider Guardian and Morbis, come across as mediocre. Even though the first and second phase of the fight are pretty inventive, the final form is anything but. Because not only does this mutated Ing look deeply uncreative, his battle strategy is really irritating. Not only will he blast you with energy shots and ram into you, this version of Ing keeps altering his core so that he's immune to all but one of your weapons. As a result, you have to keep switching weapon to find the one that he's vulnerable to. But by the time you find the correct energy beam, Ing has changed his vulnerability, meaning you have to cycle through your weapons all over again. Even if you shoot the Emperor with the correct enemy beam, it chips off such a microscopic amount you can't usually tell if it's working or not. Because of this, you'll likely waste a lot of time blasting the Emperor Ing with the wrong weapon, and that is not a fun experience. And number 1, YEVON, Final Fantasy X. As soon as Final Fantasy X begins, the player is made aware of Sin, a seemingly mindless beast who's terrorized the world for a millennium. But during your adventure, our hero Tidus discovers Sin is actually being controlled by the spirit of his father Jecht. Now, bait and switches like this are nothing new in Final Fantasy, but this is one of the few times where it's executed perfectly. Although Sin is originally depicted as a generic monster, learning his identity makes Tidus' mission more personal and the storyline more compelling as a result. So when Tidus faces off against Jecht after he takes on his final form, the face-off is as emotional as it is epic. But when Jecht is defeated, Tidus' party is forced to duke it out with YEVON, the spirit of the summoner who created Sin in the first place. Because this character has no relationship with Tidus or his friends, well, this confrontation lacks any impact. And what's worse is that you can't even lose this fight. All you have to do is simply go through the motions for YEVON to bite the dust. Final Fantasy VII also concluded with an unlosable fight, but that worked because the hero and villain had a deeply personal relationship. Yet here, what you're doing is basically battling a tiny ant. And how is that fun, crushing a tiny ant? A tiny ant. And there we go, my friends, those were 10 video games with amazing bosses, all except the last one. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules, so you can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, where the O is a 0. We can swing by Instagram, where it's the same handle, RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there, my friends. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I hope that you're treating yourself well with love and respect, because you deserve all the best things in life, alright? And do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. You are a massive ledge, and I want nothing but the best for you, alright? So go out there and smash it today. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.